French billionaire invited his black maid as a joke, but when she entered the ballroom, his entire empire began to fall. The Biltmore Grand Hotel glittered like a Fabergé egg cracked open for the city's most powerful. Crystal chandeliers blazed from the ceiling. Champagne danced in tall glasses. And just as the orchestra reached its crescendo, silence. The hush fell like a veil. Every neck turned, every eye locked onto the woman gliding down the staircase in crimson silk. Susan Morris. Her skin glowed beneath the soft chandelier light. The gown, elegant, tailored, timeless, hugged her figure with quiet defiance. No brand name, no diamonds. Yet somehow, she made every couture-clad guest look overdressed. There was something regal about her that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. By the bar stood Alain Alexandre, 40-year-old French billionaire and self-made tech titan. He was famous for closing deals with a wink and a smirk. But tonight, the smirk was gone. So was the wink. In its place, an uneasy twitch. His fingers clenched the edge of a champagne flute as if it might steady him. From across the ballroom, whispers slithered like smoke. Who is she? She looks familiar. Is she royalty? Alain didn't move. He couldn't. What none of them knew, what no one in that glittering crowd could imagine, was that the woman descending the marble stairs used to live in mansions bigger than this one. That she had once stood beside Alain in front of cameras, proud and unbroken. That 15 years ago, he helped destroy her family, and assumed she'd disappeared. But Susan Morris didn't disappear. She planned. 24 hours earlier. In a 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem, Susan Morris sat at the kitchen table with her 9-year-old nephew, Tyrell. He was sketching superheroes in a spiral notebook. On the table beside him, the gilded invitation lay unopened. Thick cardstock. Alain Alexandre's seal embossed in gold. Tyrell glanced up. "Auntie, are you going to go to the party?" Susan looked at him, smiled, and brushed a hand over his curls. "I think it's time they remembered who I am." She rose from the table, walked toward the closet, and reached for a long-forgotten garment bag. Inside, beneath layers of preserved tissue, rested a dress stitched with memory, a piece of her mother's past and her own. She didn't need to make a scene, she just needed to be seen. And Alain Alexandre was about to find out what happened when you try to humiliate the wrong woman. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Morning light filtered through thin curtains as the city stirred awake. Outside, Harlem moved with its usual rhythm, buses growling at red lights, sidewalk vendors setting up early, and the echo of music from a passing car. Inside a modest third-floor apartment, Susan Morris buttoned up her uniform, neat, navy, starched at the collar. Tyrell was still asleep, his sketchbook open on the floor beside his bed, one sneaker still on. She knelt to kiss his forehead, pulled a blanket over his shoulders, and grabbed the manila folder from the kitchen counter. Inside it, tucked behind a Metro card and a nearly paid-off electric bill, was the invitation. She hadn't opened it again. She didn't need to. She could feel its weight, like a dare. 9:12 a.m. The elevator dinged as Susan stepped into the penthouse lobby. She didn't flinch at the security guard who didn't make eye contact. She didn't greet the receptionist who never remembered her name. She just walked forward, calm, steady, invisible. Inside the triplex, the scent of expensive leather and polished wood hung in the air. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline view that could make a person feel like a god. But Susan didn't pause. She moved like she belonged in spaces no one thought she belonged. "Morning, Susan," mumbled Lucy, the estate coordinator, without looking up from her iPad. "Master bedroom needs new linens. Mr. Alexandra spilled wine again. Also scrub the terrace. He's got investors coming tonight." Susan nodded once without speaking. That was part of it, the silence. They liked that about her. She didn't talk back, didn't make herself known. She came, she cleaned, she left. What they never realized was that she never stopped listening. In the first-floor office, she vacuumed behind the walnut desk, careful to slide her phone into the panel gap where the voice recorder app could capture every word from the open conference call speaker. Upstairs, she changed the bed sheets in Alain's room, discreetly glancing at the open briefcase on the chaise lounge. Passports, a USB drive, a scribbled post-it note, Zurich Act, finalize, don't CC Jeff. She didn't touch a thing. She just noted where everything was. It would be there when she needed it. In the kitchen, she polished the chrome espresso machine while Alain laughed on the phone in French. He spoke freely, assuming she didn't understand, assuming she wasn't listening, assuming she wasn't there. "Susan, coffee," he said absently, snapping his fingers like she were Alexa with legs. She made it, placed it, left the room. He didn't thank her. No one ever did. Later that night, back in Harlem, she sat on the floor with her back against the couch. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and Tyrell's pencil scratching paper as he sketched a hero with a red cape and silver eyes. The invitation lay on the table. "Are you going to go?" Tyrell asked without looking up. Susan didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed fixed on the envelope, its thick edges, the wax seal, the cold golden lettering. "Why'd they invite you?" he added, frowning slightly. "Aren't they mean?" She turned to look at him. His face was so open, so trusting. He still believed the world would make sense, that good people always won, that bad people apologized. She didn't want to tell him the truth, so she said, "Sometimes people think they're better than you, baby, but they only win when you believe them." Tyrell blinked, then smiled a little. "Like the heroes in your old stories?" "Exactly like that." He leaned against her shoulder and kept drawing. At 2:03 a.m., Susan opened the shoebox beneath her bed. She laid everything out on the comforter. Printed emails, USB drives, photos, financial records, taped conversations, even a torn receipt with a scrawled signature. 2 years' worth of quiet labor, documented in shadows. She flipped through the stack slowly, stopping on one photo. Alain, smiling beside her father, 15 years ago. They were toasting the opening of the Morris Capital Innovation Fund, back when her father still believed in partnerships, in integrity. Her eyes didn't tear. They sharpened. They had taken everything from her. Her future, her name, her silence. But she had taken something back. She slipped the photo back in the file and zipped it shut. The dress was already hanging in the back of the closet, waiting. Susan Morris hadn't been seen in years. That was about to change. 15 years ago, Susan Morris didn't wear a maid's uniform. She wore pearls. Her name was longer then, Susan Morris Davenport, and it carried weight in the corridors of power. Her father, Harold Morris, was a rising legend in the venture capital world. A black man who didn't just break into the old boys club. He built his own table and invited others to sit. They lived in a sprawling white-columned estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Tennis courts out back. A private chef who made lemon pancakes every Sunday. Their Labrador Bishop used to wait by the front gate for Susan to return from school, wagging his tail like clockwork. She went to Wyndham Prep, lacrosse, debate team, lead in the school play. Summers were for the vineyard. Winters for ski weekends in Aspen. Everything in her life moved forward with quiet certainty. At 17, Susan had already been featured in Town Country. Not for being a debutante, though she was, but for launching a scholarship program for black girls in STEM. Her Stanford acceptance letter had come with a handwritten note from the dean. She was going to double major in engineering and public policy. She wanted to change things, and she believed she could, until Alain Alexandre walked into her life. He wasn't famous then, not yet. Back then, Alain was a slick, sharp 25-year-old from Paris, trying to make a name in American finance. Charismatic, clever, ruthless. He had a talent for finding vulnerabilities in family-run firms, then flipping them for profit. Harold Morris met him through a mutual acquaintance. Alain pitched a joint investment in a medical software company. The merger looked clean. The paperwork passed inspection. But Susan remembered the way her father hesitated when Alain spoke. Something in the way he smiled too easily. trusted too quickly. 6 months after the deal closed, the audit hit. Harold was accused of misrepresenting financials. The media pounced. SEC froze the fund's assets. Investors panicked. And Alain. He vanished, leaving behind doctored emails and just enough misdirection to frame Harold as the sole architect of the collapse. Susan was home the day her father came back from the courthouse. He looked smaller, tired in a way she had never seen. He handed her an envelope, his resignation from the board, and said softly, "They'll call it justice, sweetheart, but it's just power in a prettier suit." 3 months later, he was gone. Heart attack. In his study, Susan found him. The press called it suicide. The story was easy to swallow. A wealthy black man who flew too close to the sun. One of the morning shows even framed it as a cautionary tale. Ambition unchecked. No one mentioned that the documents proving his innocence arrived a week too late. Susan didn't speak at the funeral. She couldn't. She just stood between two worlds, one that was mourning and one that was watching. After that, everything unraveled. The estate was sold. The college fund dissolved in legal fees. Her mother moved to Atlanta to care for her own aging parents. Susan tried to finish her senior year, but the headlines followed her like shadows. Classmates whispered, teachers grew cautious, friends went silent. She dropped out, disappeared. For years she lived quietly, cleaned houses, took night jobs, avoided questions. She wore silence like armor and learned to move without being noticed. But she never forgot the name that changed everything. Alain Alexandre. One rainy evening, a decade after her father's death, Susan saw his name flash across a Times Square billboard. Alain Alexandre, building tomorrow. His face filled the screen. Confident, philanthropic, lauded. He was being honored for a new AI initiative. And that was the moment it changed. She realized he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. No one had held him accountable. No one had asked where his seed money came from. The world had moved on and left Harold Morris buried under a lie. So Susan began to plan. She changed her name back to just Susan Morris, shortened her resume, took a job with a cleaning agency, told them she preferred quiet homes, high-end, discreet. When Alain's penthouse listing came across the intake board, she requested it. No one recognized her. Why would they? She'd aged out of their memory, and in their eyes, she was no longer a girl from Greenwich, just another working woman with a mop and a badge. It was perfect, invisible enough to be underestimated, present enough to hear everything. For 2 years, she cleaned around the edges of Alain's empire. She memorized door codes, noted delivery schedules, marked which drawers stayed locked and which passwords changed monthly. She dusted around corruption and vacuumed under deception. She learned the names of his shell companies, the voices of the politicians on speakerphone, the smirk in his laugh when he bragged to guests. No one asks questions when you have charm and money, the rest is theater. And all the while she waited for the right moment, the right audience, the right platform. Because Susan Morris didn't come back to reclaim her old life. She came back to rewrite the ending, and Alain Alexandre was going to learn the hard way that sometimes the most powerful woman in the room is the one you tried hardest not to see. 2 years earlier, the plan had no name. It was just a feeling in Susan's chest, tight, unshakable, and quiet, the kind of feeling that didn't shout. It whispered. She stood outside a glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, wearing navy slacks, a pressed shirt, and a plain smile. The building belonged to Alexandra Holdings. Floor 47 housed Alain's private residence. She held a manila envelope with her cleaning agency paperwork inside. The receptionist glanced at her resume and barely blinked. "Background check came back clean," she mumbled. "He prefers quiet help. No talking unless spoken to. You okay with that?" Susan nodded. The name on the badge said S. Morris, not Davenport, not daughter of Harold, not former Stanford-bound prodigy, just Morris. Quiet help. Perfect. From day one, Susan moved with practiced invisibility. She folded herself into the corners of Alain's world, said little, asked less. Alain never looked directly at her. That helped. He passed her in the hallway, phone in hand, barking orders in French-accented English. He called her cleaning staff, not by name. Once he asked if she was the new girl. She'd already been there 4 months. She took her time learning the rhythms of the penthouse when the executive assistants arrived. Which bodyguards were lazy. When Alain left the terrace door unlocked, she started with sound. There was a vent in the main study that carried voices from Alain's phone calls directly into the central airshaft. Susan hid a small voice recorder just inside the grate. She taped it into place during a scheduled deep clean, covered the opening with a cloth and made a note in her phone. Recorder A, office vent, recharge bi-weekly. Then came visuals. Alain had a habit of leaving documents half-shredded in his private wastebasket. Susan collected them in fragments, pieced them together on her kitchen table at night with clear tape and patience. One memo was marked, Urgent, Q3 patent transfer, do not CC legal. She began using her old iPhone as a camera. Hidden in the supply cart's towel bin, it captured everything. Confidential emails left open on tablets, account numbers jotted on post-it notes, envelopes thick with cash handed off to men in suits. The hardest part wasn't planting devices or taking photos. The hardest part was staying still while they laughed. There were evenings when Alain and his guests got careless. They poured wine, they bragged, they made jokes at the expense of women, immigrants, people poorer than them. Once Alain joked about staging a sexual harassment complaint to get a female CEO ousted before a merger. He called it strategic scandal. Susan was standing 10 feet away, wiping down the espresso machine. They didn't notice her, they never did. She divided the evidence into categories. Audio A, recorded meetings, phone calls, gala whisperings. DOC B, screenshots of wire transfers, tax shelters, burner accounts. IMG-C, surveillance photos, hidden camera footage, duplicated contracts. Miss Key, emails, voice memos, statements typed on her own laptop, cross-referenced with public records. Each folder was encrypted and backed up to 3 drives, one at home, one mailed to her cousin in Atlanta, and one given to Jason Carter, her old college boyfriend turned CBS producer. Every night, Susan returned to her Harlem apartment, kicked off her shoes, and pulled the shoebox from beneath her bed. Inside, flash drives, printed records, and one handwritten label on the inside lid. Justice. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. Truth, recorded and ready. Not the kind of truth whispered over family dinners or written in a diary. The kind of truth that held up in court. The kind that ruined the right people. By the end of the first year, she had enough to spark suspicion. By the end of the second, she had enough to spark a federal investigation. But Susan didn't move yet. She waited. For the gala. For the perfect storm. For the night, Alain Alexandre would be trapped in a room full of reporters, donors, politicians, and cameras. And for once in his life, he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it. She looked at the shoebox one last time that week and gently closed the lid. The woman who once wore pearls didn't need to go back in time. She'd already brought the past with her. Now it was time to bring the truth. She didn't have many numbers memorized anymore, but his was one of them. Susan stood in the shadow of an old brick building in Harlem, the street lamp above her flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. She held a quarter in her palm, rubbed her thumb across the worn surface, then dropped it into the payphone. 1, 2, 3. The line rang 4 times. Then came the voice, older, deeper, but still his. Jason Carter, CBS. For a second, she didn't speak. The sound of his voice knocked the wind from her. It had been, 10 years? 11? Jason, she said quietly. It's me. A pause. Susan. Another pause. Susan Morris. Used to be Davenport. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had softened. Where the hell have you been? They met the next night in the back booth of a diner near Columbia University. It was raining again, and Jason had his hood pulled up, his collar turned high like he was expecting someone to recognize him. Susan slid into the booth and placed a flash drive on the table. No small talk, he said. There's no time. He hesitated, then picked it up. You know I get pitches like this every day. Anonymous tips, conspiracy theories. Everyone with a folder thinks they've cracked the code. Susan looked at him, unblinking. Listen to the first 5 minutes. Jason plugged the drive into his laptop, slipped in an earpiece, and pressed play. What he heard first was Alain Alexandre's unmistakable voice, charming, smug. Then came the words, "If the senator wants his re-election fund topped off, fine. But I want that FDA approval by Friday, or I start pulling contracts." Jason's expression didn't change, but his jaw tensed. He listened to 3 more minutes, Alain laughing about burying a whistleblower under a pile of NDAs and mocking the victims of a failed medical device rollout. When he pulled the earpiece out, he didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, "Holy shit," Susan nodded. "There's more." They stayed in that booth for 3 hours. Susan laid it all out. The stolen patents, the offshore accounts, the shredded contracts she'd pieced back together with tape, the recordings, the timestamps. The photo of Alain and her father, taken just months before the scandal that broke her world. Jason listened without interruption. Occasionally he scribbled in a small black notebook. Finally he said, "If even half of this is real, we're not talking about a takedown, we're talking about a demolition." "It's real," Susan said, "and I don't want a whisper campaign. I want the world to see it live." He raised an eyebrow. "Live?" "Yes," she said. "At the gala. He invited me as a joke. I'll be there. I want you to be there too, with your people. Cameras, photographers, stream teams, hidden mics. I want every truth I drop to hit the airwaves before he can spin it." Jason leaned back in the booth, running a hand through his beard. "You're asking me to broadcast a billionaire's public execution on national television." "No," Susan said. "I'm asking you to broadcast the truth, the one they buried with my father." Within days, the plan was in motion. CBS couldn't officially cover the event. Alain's legal team would sniff them out in minutes. But Jason had contacts in every media circle. Freelance shooters, paparazzi, social bloggers who lived for chaos, a documentary crew with a side gig posing as event photographers. He embedded them all. One team would set up as caterers, another would pose as event videographers. Micro cameras would be disguised as table centerpieces. Every entrance and exit would be monitored. All they needed was the trigger. That would be Susan. She'd wear a lapel mic linked to Jason's team. The moment she said the phrase, "We're live now, Alain," the footage would go public. Not just to Jason's servers, but to live feeds on social media, encrypted mirrors, and 2 major international news desks with pre-cleared access. There would be no putting the genie back. Jason insisted on one condition. "If we do this," he said, "there's no halfway, no pulling back. You ready for that?" Susan looked him in the eye. "I was born ready." The night before the gala, Jason sent her a message. "J, every exit covered, every mic tested. The net is ready. S, good. J, you sure you're okay? S, I will be. J, you still wear that little gold watch? S, no. I traded it for a voice recorder. J, that sounds about right." She didn't say it out loud, but seeing Jason again stirred something she hadn't felt in years. Connection. Not the romantic kind. Something deeper. The kind forged in memory, in shared history. He remembered who she was. And now, he was helping her remind the world. She sat at her kitchen table that night, alone. The dress was hanging in the closet. The shoebox was packed. The plan was in place. And somewhere downtown, Alain Alexandre slept soundly in his penthouse, unaware that the last 24 hours of his kingdom had just begun. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the wind feel sacred. Susan stood beneath an old oak tree, eyes fixed on the grey headstone. It had been polished recently. She came often, but tonight felt different. Final. The marble read, Harold Morris, 1958, 2010. Built from hope, gone too soon, not forgotten. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the letter, creased, faded at the folds, ink smudged from time and weather. It was the last thing he wrote her. She opened it slowly, like it still had breath. Susan, if they ever take everything from us, and I pray they won't, Remember that what they can't touch is your mind. Don't waste your life chasing vengeance. It's a fire that burns both sides. But justice builds. Wait, watch. And when your moment comes, don't flinch. You are your mother's elegance, my tenacity, and your own sharp fire. I love you. Dad. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She didn't cry. Not tonight. She crouched and pressed her palm to the ground. They thought they buried you, she whispered, but they just planted me. At home, the long box waited. Susan slid open the closet door, knelt, and pulled it out with both hands. She hadn't touched it in years. Dust bloomed in the air as she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in thin layers of ivory tissue, was the gown. Her mother's gown. Crimson silk, high neck, modest cut. Tailored for presence, not flash. It had belonged to Diane Davenport Morris, Harold's wife, Susan's mother, and once one of the most quietly revered women on the East Coast's philanthropic circuit. Susan ran her fingers over the fabric. No sparkles, no labels, just legacy. She stood and held it against herself. The fit still held. She didn't need new armor. She already had her mother's. Tyrell sat on the couch, swinging his legs, watching her with wide, solemn eyes. "You're really going," he said. She nodded. He looked at the gown, then back at her. "They're going to see you now." Susan smiled gently, tucking a curl behind his ear. "They won't have a choice." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you be on TV?" "Probably." "Can I stay up and watch?" She kissed his forehead. "You can fall asleep watching, that's close enough." He smiled at that. But then, softer, "Are you scared?" Susan paused. "Yeah," she said truthfully. "A little." "Then why are you still going?" She pulled him into her arms and held him tight. "Because you deserve to grow up in a world where people like us don't have to disappear to survive." Tyrell nodded against her shoulder. "Go make them listen, Auntie." Downtown, the Biltmore Grand Hotel was a flurry of preparation. Jason stood by the ballroom entrance, headset on, clipboard in hand, his eyes scanning the room like a general inspecting the battlefield. The CBS team moved like ghosts, a floral centerpiece. Inside it, a pinhole camera with a full view of the podium. The dessert station, wired with a directional mic. The chandelier mount, housing a panoramic fisheye lens. Nothing flashy. Nothing suspicious. Every angle, every exit covered. Disguised cameramen wandered the floor, adjusting lens caps and testing lighting. One woman pretended to be rehearsing violin cues while syncing audio frequencies to the hidden mics. Jason checked his watch. 19 hours until showtime. He texted Susan, "Jay, final sweep done. No glitches. Full coverage confirmed. We're ready." S. "So am I." J. "You look great in red." S. "You haven't even seen it yet." J. "I don't need to. I remember." He hesitated before sending the last one. J. "You sure you don't want backup? Legal? Press crew?" S. "No. It started with me. It ends with me." He sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked around the ballroom one last time. The room sparkled, and the trap was set. Back in Harlem, Susan stood in front of the mirror. The gown was on now, fitted, alive. She pulled her hair up, clean and simple. She wore no necklace, no earrings, just a thin gold bracelet, her mother's. The lapel mic was clipped inside the fold of the dress, wired and tested. The box labeled Justice was sealed tight and tucked in her satchel, along with the photo of her father, the flash drives, and a press folder labeled Truth. She took one last look at herself. Not the maid, not the daughter of the fallen, just the woman who had waited 15 years to be seen. She flicked off the bathroom light and walked into the night. The ballroom shimmered with light, laughter and lies. Golden chandeliers flickered above heads that hadn't bowed in decades. Waiters glided through with trays of oysters and champagne, brushing past senators, tech moguls, oil barons. Cameras flashed for gowns and cufflinks, not consequences. At the head of it all stood Alain Alexandre, flanked by power, flattered by wealth, sipping vintage champagne like he owned the air itself. He was mid-toast when he saw her. Susan Morris, crimson silk, back straight, eyes forward. A silence rippled through the room. Alain blinked once, then twice, as if trying to recalibrate what he was seeing. His smile returned, crooked now, too wide, and he raised his glass. "Well," he called out, voice smooth as aged Scotch, "it seems even the help can find a dress. Bravo, Susan, you clean up beautifully." A few guests chuckled, unsure. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Susan didn't blink. She stepped onto the stage beside the podium. Alain watched her, amused, still thinking this was performance, a joke with too much budget. "Apologies," he said with mock concern. "Was the waitstaff given a mic?" Susan turned to face the room. "My name," she said, voice clear, calm and carried, "is Susan Morris Davenport." A murmur rippled. "I'm not here to serve drinks. I'm here to serve truth." Alain's smile faltered. Susan reached into her satchel and pulled out a small remote. "We're live now, Alain." And with a press of her thumb, the projector behind her lit up. The room froze. Then, his voice. "If the senator wants his re-election fund topped off, fine. But I want that FDA approval by Friday or I start pulling contracts." The words fell like lead. A gasp from the corner. The room shifted. Alain took a step forward, but Susan raised her hand. "There's more." She clicked again. "That medical device, it doesn't work, but the investors won't know that until after launch. By then, we'll have cleared triple ROI. Laughter. His laughter. A woman near the back turned pale and stepped back, hand over her mouth. Susan's voice stayed steady. "Your host tonight has profited off faulty medical trials, stolen patents from young engineers, and bribed elected officials to bury the evidence." Click. "She begged me not to kill the deal, said it would ruin her dad. I told her he's just another black guy playing rich, one scandal and they'll eat him alive." The screen went black. Silence. For a long moment no one moved. Then from the crowd, "Is that real?" It's his voice. "My God!" Alain stepped forward now, arms raised like a performer calming the crowd. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. Fabricated audio, edited. She's clearly unstable." Susan turned back to the screen. A final image filled the wall behind her. A photo. A young girl in pearls beside two men, Harold Morris and a much younger Alain Alexandre. It was taken at the launch party for Morris Capital's Innovation Fund, the night before everything fell apart. "That was me at 17, Susan said, beside the man who destroyed my father, a man who smiled in our family's home, shook my father's hand and signed a deal designed to collapse everything he built." She stepped forward. "You ruined an honest man. Tonight I return the favor, with receipts." The crowd exploded, not in applause but in motion. Phones were out. Guests whispered furiously. Some turned and walked out. Others stood frozen, not wanting to miss what might happen next. Several donors to Alain's foundation quietly disappeared toward the back exits. And Alain? He didn't move. Not at first. But behind his eyes, the math was starting to unravel. Backstage, Jason watched the live feed spike across 3 servers. Viewership tripled by the second. Hashtags trended before the next recording played. He whispered into his mic, "We're officially viral." On stage, Susan lifted her chin slightly. "I don't want your money. I don't want your company. I want your silence broken, your power revoked, and your name carved next to the crimes you committed." A pause. "And I'm just getting started." Alain stepped forward, jaw tight, voice straining to regain its usual authority. "Everyone, please. This woman is disturbed. This is a publicity stunt. My legal team will handle—" But he didn't finish the sentence. The double doors at the back of the ballroom opened in unison. 6 men entered, moving with crisp federal precision. Black suits, earpieces, badges already out. U.S. Marshals. Alain froze. The crowd parted in silence, like a tide being pulled back. One of the agents stepped forward, firm but calm. "Mr. Alain Alexandre, you're under arrest for financial fraud, obstruction of justice, securities violations, and conspiracy to commit federal crimes. Click. The sound of handcuffs, gasps, phones raised, cameras zoomed. Susan didn't move. She just watched him. Watched the man who once buried her father, now struggling to keep his hands from trembling in public. He turned toward her as they led him away. But it was, and they both knew it. Backstage, Jason spoke into the mic again. "We're live to 1.2 million and counting. CBS has the feed. Local affiliates are picking it up. It's happening." He looked toward the monitors as Alain was escorted past a row of crystal champagne towers. A fitting exit. By midnight, the story had detonated. Justice, in red, trended across 5 continents. The CBS Midnight Special broke all early-hour viewership records. Clips from Susan's speech played in loops, on TV, online, in memes, in music remixes, even on late-night talk show intros. One headline read, "Billionaire brought down by former Maid in stunning gala takedown." Another, "Red dress, cold receipts, the woman who ended Alain Alexandre." Susan didn't stay for interviews. She left the gala the way she came, quietly. Jason handled the press. The evidence was already in DOJ hands. The rest was just noise now. In Harlem, light spilled out of windows and onto stoops. Inside Susan's apartment building, neighbors gathered around TVs and phones. Some stood in doorways, blinking in disbelief. "That's Miss Susan?" She was cleaning penthouses. She walked past us every day. She was watching the whole time. Tyrell was asleep on the couch, a throw blanket pulled to his chin, the flicker of the news reflecting off his face. Susan sat beside him, shoes off, dress still on, eyes on the screen. She wasn't smiling, not yet. In the days that followed, Alain Alexandre's empire unraveled like a cheap knockoff suit. Trading was halted on 3 of his companies. Board members resigned in clusters. The SEC launched a full-scale investigation into 5 shell corporations linked to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Investors panicked. Stock prices plummeted. One senator denied ever speaking with Alain. 2 others cooperated fully. Internal whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by Susan's public reveal. The press called it the cleanest takedown in modern corporate history. Susan called it what it was, long overdue. Alain's mugshot appeared on the front page of the New York Times. No tie, eyes sunken, a man undone. He was indicted on 17 counts: fraud, obstruction, witness tampering, conspiracy, and money laundering. His bail hearing was denied. Too many assets, too many risks, too many secrets finally exposed. A week later, Jason found Susan sitting on a bench in Morningside Park, watching Tyrell race down a hill on his scooter. He sat beside her. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." Jason nodded. Then, "You know people are calling you a hero." Susan's eyes followed Tyrell as he zipped past. "I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it so my nephew wouldn't grow up thinking the world would always swallow people like us." She looked over. "I didn't come to wear Alain's crown. I came to melt it down." Jason smiled at that. She looked forward again. "And build something better." 3 months later, Susan sat in a chair made of glass and steel, looking out across the skyline. The office was quiet. Clean lines, soft wood tones, windows stretching from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't cold. It felt earned. The name etched in silver behind her desk read, "The Davenport Justice Foundation, no fanfare. No marble busts. Just 3 words. And a mission. To defend the voices that had been silenced. To fight for those buried under broken systems. To make the invisible undeniable." A former union worker was meeting with an attorney down the hall. A paralegal was scanning documents for a case against a pharmaceutical giant. In the conference room, a young woman sat with her hands shaking over a non-disclosure agreement she'd just broken, because Susan's foundation promised to stand behind her. Susan closed her laptop, leaned back in her chair, and let the moment breathe. This wasn't Alain's empire. This was her father's legacy, rebuilt brick by brick, name by name, truth by truth. Jason poked his head into the office. Press wants a quote about the new partnerships. NBC, BBC, and I think Netflix wants to talk documentary. Susan raised an eyebrow. Of course they do. He stepped in, leaned against the frame. You sure you don't want to give them something? You've got the world's attention. I didn't do this for attention. Jason nodded. He'd heard it before. But still it amazed him. You're a hard woman to market, you know that? I'm not a brand, she said. I'm a warning. They both smiled. He handed her a manila folder. Scholarship funds approved. Tyrell's school called, said he's thriving. He always was, Susan said softly. He just needed someone to believe in him. Jason hesitated. So, what's next? She looked out the window again. Next, I teach a generation how to protect what's theirs before someone tries to take it. The offers came. Book deals, speaking tours, daytime interviews, podcasts, exclusive docu-series. They wanted the angle, the moment, the dress, the mic drop. But Susan declined everyone. No memoir, no spotlight. She had said what she needed to say on the biggest stage she could find, and the world had already listened. Everything else was just noise. This wasn't about fame, she told one reporter. It was about the truth. And she'd said the truth out loud. Now she was building the space for others to do the same. That evening, Susan walked through Harlem with Tyrell. The air was thick with the golden light of late spring. Music spilled out of bodegas. Children zipped by on scooters. Life moved in its ordinary way, which was exactly how she liked it. Tyrell walked beside her, now in his private school uniform, backpack slung across one shoulder. He kicked a pebble down the sidewalk, then looked up at her. Auntie? Yeah? Do you miss it? She looked down, puzzled. Miss what? The old life, he said. Before the gala, before the fancy office, and people knowing your name. Susan paused, thought about it. The house in Greenwich, the trust fund that vanished, the magazine clippings, the silence she wore for too many years. She smiled. No, baby, she said, brushing a hand over his curls. I just built a new one. She looked ahead. One where no one else has to be invisible again. They kept walking, just another pair of silhouettes under a Harlem sunset. But now, the world knew exactly who she was, and this time, it would never forget.